All right, y'all. I am Joe Hughes. Welcome to this show. I am a solutions architect here, guys, focused on automation and integration. Hopefully, I've helped y'all out, whether it's through code samples or scripts or customer engagements, or you've found stuff that we have available on Veeam Hub or on the forums. I allegedly code to be efficient. Really, that means I am too lazy to do things twice if I don't have to. In the co-pilot seat, Grogu is my commando for today. We had lots of memes in the slides, but don't worry, they actually got removed because the jokes were just too lame even for me. So let's get started. We're going to cover some slides pretty quickly just to go over PowerShell 101 and some VBR updates. We're going to cover RESTful API 101. We're going to cover the existing API that we have for Enterprise Manager, just so everybody knows what we're coming from out of version 10. Then we're going to take a look at the new APIs, some details about just the current Veeam APIs in general, and then we're going to get into VBR, the capabilities for Veeam 1, and then it's going to be demo time. So, come on forward, people. There we go. PowerShell. So imagine this. Joe is starting off with PowerShell, as usual. Biggest things to note with version 11 is actually as of the beta 2 for version 11, we have a module and no longer a snap-in. So this does mean that for people that are running Veeam PowerShell scripts, especially if they're doing things interactively at the command line, they're going to notice that when they run the command line, the commandlet for adding in the old PowerShell snap-in, it's going to give them an error that those do not exist anymore. Really, all it's going to do is give that warning. If anybody comments that line out in a script, or if they want to actually convert it over and change it to, import module, then that will take care of converting, if you will, from the old PowerShell version to the module. Otherwise, because it is a module, if they're running anything PowerShell version 3 or higher, it will auto load, so not a big deal. For the release candidate, we had 1,141 commandlets for PowerShell. There were 926 in V10A. And the new module does work with PowerShell 6.0 and higher, right? That's basically core or version 7, which is the newer version. It is not fully cross-platform yet. There are still some caveats to work out. With some limited testing, I have gotten a few things to work coming from a Linux or a Mac client, but it's not great. I will just tell you all that. So, RESTful API 101. And yes, I did intentionally leave this lorem ipsum here because to most people, all of this just comes out sounding like Latin, right? All you really need to know about the REST API 101 to get into what we're going to go through in the demos is this is built on web protocols, which means you can actually browse through these things as if you were clicking through on a web browser. And it's simple methods, right? It's get, it's post, it's put or patch, and delete. Get means you're retrieving information. Post means you're creating something new. Put and patch means you're editing or modifying something that exists. And delete, I'm going to guess everyone can, get the intention of that. It's going to nuke things out of your API. So what are we starting with, right? Enterprise Manager API. It's built on Swagger and OpenAPI 2.0. That's something that'll make a bit more sense as we get into this. And as of version 10A, we had about 250 API calls. I want to say it's about 255, 256 that were in there. And we have a long version history for the Enterprise Manager API, right? So version 1 of the API was VBR 7, right? Then you can see it moves up to 8.0 update 3. Then we had a new version for version 9. We had a new version of the API for 9.5. 9.5 update 4 and 4B had its own REST API version. V10 dropped version 1.5. There's now a version 1.6 for V11 for the Enterprise Manager. But what you can see here is that it took us quite a few versions to get this number of API calls that are available here in the API. And we'll see how many there actually are in the new VBR API once we get that into the console. So to touch quickly over just all of our current API details, this asterisk meaning this is not Enterprise Manager. All of the other product APIs that we have, the new API for VBR itself, VBO, VAC that was retitled to the Veeam Service Provider Console, the APIs that we've got for AWS and Azure, All of these are going to be running on OpenAPI Spec 3.0. They're all using OAuth 2 authentication, which really just means you pass in a username and password, and we give back a token, and you use that token for the length of your interaction with the API. There are Swagger interfaces on every one of our products. Some of them are on different ports. Some of them are on the same port as the web UI that's there. You just add a Swagger at the end of it. We'll make sure everybody's got the documentation to know how to get to those and just have a quick list of that. We also have dedicated REST API documentation. So there's dedicated docs and even a big change that I will show y'all for VBR v11, where the documentation for the APIs is coming a long way, and it's making it very, very user-friendly for people that are even totally net new to consuming APIs at all. And the newer APIs, specifically VBO v5 was the one that had this the most apparent, are actually getting change logs. So you can see what's changing in every version of the API, which was not a thing that we had in the past. So it's very good to see, and especially for folks like service providers that are using this, or people that are using this for automation at scale, seeing that we're actually calling out changes to existing API calls, and more specifically breaking changes that are there across versions of the API. That's big, right? That's a huge ask that we have from lots of our customers for the API documentation, and it's finally getting in there. So jumping over to the VBR API, right? This means most of these are details that came out of the Tech Expo training last year, but a lot of people didn't necessarily catch it or need the refresher on what's in here. This means with this API, there is no enterprise manager required for API control of Veeam backup and replication. There are still going to be different functions for Enterprise Manager, obviously, that is built to be essentially a self-service control and centralized management and reporting. So there will be things that exist in Enterprise Manager that will not exist in VBR, but this means that to do basic control and get basic reporting back, you do not need to have an Enterprise Manager install. This comes in by default with the VBR install for version 11, right? It gets its own dedicated service that exists on the server that opens up this port and opens up the Swagger interface for this. The API currently includes job configuration. This means you can create, edit, and delete, but these are going to be backup jobs and only for vSphere VM objects. We also have the capabilities for infrastructure configuration, which means we can add managed servers, proxies, and repos. There's some limitations on that on the next slide, but for the most part, we can cover the bulk of what most of our customers are trying to do right now. And we also have a new automation endpoint, which allows for bulk export and import. And really what this is intended for is being able to export things like credentials, all of our managed servers, the proxies, the repos, all of those instances. So should somebody be trying to stamp out multiple iterations of a server, they can even just kind of export this whole structure, modify these instances or essentially host names inside of a JSON file and import this on another instance and do bulk builds of VBR servers if that's something they're looking to do. As for limitations, this is ripped straight out of the Tech Expo slides from last year. For jobs, again, backup jobs with VMware VMs only. Repositories, we're doing DAS and NAS only. Object storage and scale out repos coming soon. Some of those things have actually made it in now, but it's not completely there. And again, just to read it for everybody, this is all coming off of the V11 RC. I did not, unfortunately, have enough time to install RTM and rerun through all of my testing and validation for everything overnight. So sorry, y'all. As for proxies, VMware only, not a huge thing for the majority of our customers. This is the number one thing they're asking for in API coverage anyway. Managed servers will include everything other than Hyper-V and vCloud Director. And then for inventory, which means actually going through and seeing the objects that exist inside of a production environment, it's limited to VMware vSphere only. This stuff will make more sense as we actually demo it and go look in an environment to see what it is. VM1, this one's really a quick touch point, right? It's just basic coverage of minor functions. You can definitely tell that the VM1 API is a very version 1 product. Essentially, it includes data collection, event logs, and licensing. That's it. I think off the top of my head, it's 11 API calls that exist in the VM1 API. It will grow over time, and honestly, this is really, really good to see, just that we even have an API that is getting us to automation of VM1 other than just scheduling reports via email. And now we're just going to go ahead and cut over to demo. So let's flip our screen share real quick. All right, John, let's get into the lab.
Hey, Joe, while you're doing that, there's a question there from Christopher. Is there any technical limitation? Yeah, is there any technical limitation on why configuration is for VMware only?
Really, that was just the limitation. Again, realize this is the first iteration of us having this API at all. So it was development having to try and put resources towards what makes the most sense to get out there first, basically, for all of our customers, right? So it's just the same thing as all of our feature requests. We have to go for essentially what's the biggest bang for the buck, and getting us across the line to have this configuration and have it be focused on VMware vSphere first made this the most sense for the largest number of customers, right? So that was just what they tackled first. The other things will come along, and some of those are just more complicated constructs to get wrapped into an API. So to look at where we're starting from, right? This is the Enterprise Manager API, right? And just for quick comparison for everybody, this is what I was talking about with this being the Swagger and Open API spec version 2. Whereas when we click over to the VBR REST API, this is version 3. Looks quite a bit different. We'll get into more as we get into that part of the demo. But to show everybody where we're coming from, this is how the old Enterprise Manager API is structured. A lot of these things look very similar to the objects if anybody knows them from the database tables or specifically from .NET, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to work on. A lot of people are going to look at this list and say, I don't know where to find stuff. Like I expect to find just jobs, not this CREST jobs container, right? Swagger is really good on the old Enterprise Manager API if you are trying to find stuff, just because of the fact that you can go list or expand all of your operations for everything and then just do kind of a search and find on the page, but it's not terribly helpful, right? Not the way that Swagger is for the new APIs. To understand more of what it is we're doing with the APIs, right? This is just us logging into, this is Enterprise Manager it's in the US demo lab. So this is at least running Enterprise Manager on v11. When we go log into this thing, I'm just clicking for the latest version of the session manager. I'm gonna hit submit, type in my credentials. And sign in, oops. Oh, gods are not liking me today. Here we go. Okay. This view, which is all XML, is an easier way to find things within the Enterprise Manager API, but it's still not very nice, right? You have to go through here. This is a very unstructured list, and it's essentially all of these components as they were added into the API. We have our backup servers, managed servers, jobs, right? Replica points. We've got all of our sessions for backups, restores, and replicas. Query service, which is very handy and very helpful to look up things inside of Enterprise Manager to get details about multiple jobs or multiple sessions and things like this. But this web interface is really the kind of the same thing we have to deal with if we're even working with tools like Postman or an actual API tool, right? It's not great. So the improvements that we have are with VBR REST API. We have very easily broken down sections for what is covered in the API, right? Login, which is just step 1. That's why it's up here by itself as OAuth 2. We have the ability to get details about the server time and cert, like what are the associated services on the box on the back end. Even some new things that exist here that were not covered in PowerShell or were not things that were easily manipulatable on a VBR server in the past, right? All of our general options. The configuration backup and being able to edit and start this here, which was, things that were getting kind of taken out of PowerShell control. Traffic rules in a very easy to understand way, right? So let's go ahead and poke around this a little bit. So with this Swagger UI, everything that we're doing on this page, especially as we hit try it out, you're doing this live, right? So with me doing this in the lab, I'm warning everybody right now, what I'm doing is only gets. Inside of the lab, do not go modify things. We want to only be running gets. I will pull up my lab in a little bit to show you guys actually making some changes, and we're going to run through some live configurations with a true lab environment where we can actually break some things. So all I do is, using a password for the grant type here, right? We're passing in a username and a password. I hit execute. What I get back is this response body, which has my access token and a refresh token. For right now, since I'm planning to basically be in the API for less than 15 minutes and poke around in some things, all I need is this access token. We copy this access token, come into authorize. The format that we need to have for this is bearer space and then the API key. So we just type in bearer space and paste in our API key, hit authorize. It shows that it's got a value that's in here. We can close this out. For a simple check, I can just go to get general options, just hit try it out. All we're doing is a get, so all we have to do is hit execute. And now I get back the details for all the general options that we have on this server, right? For the most part, everything's going to be as default. We're going to see that the generic email settings that are here, notify on success, notify on warning, notify on failure, notify on last retry, are all set to true. Here's our storage space thresholds. Here's our data store space thresholds. But things that, even trying to do this from PowerShell, this would have been me digging into WMI to pull things out of the registry on a box. It's not the greatest thing in the world to do. Now it's things that are more easily accessible, whether it's reporting or making modifications within the API. So great changes for a lot of these things. One of the greatest things that we have in here for this is the fact that we can actually get sessions for all of our backups that exist inside of an environment. For this one, we're going to go ahead and switch this type filter to just a job because we want job sessions. I'm going to execute this. All I want to do through here is basically find just any job. I'm going to say I will take this VMware DC. I want to grab this ID that's here. We're going to go ahead and minimize get all sessions. I'm going to come to this get session to be able to populate in a specific ID of a session to give me back just this one instance. So now that I have this session ID, it's a little bit easier to see what's in here, right? We get the state of stopped. We get the result of success. We get a message of success. We find out that it was not canceled the last time it was run. Very basic details, but a lot of these are not super easy to get with PowerShell, right? Pretty good on Enterprise Manager, but there's a lot of capabilities in here with an API that's focused directly on VBR and not just on Enterprise Manager, right? This is way more focused on the actual operations we're trying to do with Veeam. One of the other great things that we have here with this is get session logs. And I know a couple of people, specifically a lot of people that have had the pain of doing this within PowerShell, are really going to like this functionality. Get session logs for a particular session ID will give us the actual text, which is the line-by-line output in the GUI log, right? This is exactly what you're going to see in VBR if you're poking around inside of the GUI and you're looking at a session and you want to see all of the line-by-line output for start time, stop time, what the title was for all of these steps. This is a thing that when we do this in PowerShell, typically takes me like 9 different lines of code. We have to fall back to a different .NET method and like pull out a logger and get updated records and pull out the title property of this to get to like one line here. This gives us everything, and it's very quickly and easily repeatable, where if someone wants to pull this for any particular session that they have, all they've got to do is modify this ID number for the session that they're trying to query. Some of these things don't make a big deal, but for a lot of customers that have had these pain points and have tried to do these workarounds in PowerShell or have gotten snippets of code from me or the PMs for this, huge difference to do a lot of these things. Again, other stuff that we have in here, right? The inventory browser. The easy way to try this thing out, I'm going to go get all of our vSphere servers. Again, inventory is limited to vSphere. We're just going to run execute. we're going to see, okay, we have a vCenter server for beta VCSA, and ooh, lovely. This one, we don't actually have an object ID. This should be interesting. Technically, all we really need is the name, so we'll try this out. So let's go get the server objects. And for this, we are required to feed it a name of the vCenter server. So we will put in beta VCSA, hit execute, and we will see what we get back. This is essentially the API reaching out to the broker service to query and give us back the results that we have inside of our inventory for what exists within this vCenter instance. So we've got our beta VCSA as the data center object. We've got a folder. We've got the cluster. We have the actual host that this thing is running on. We have virtual machine records, including size of the VMs, right? Details that we have accessible to us through PowerShell if we run find VBR VI entity data and give it a spec of I want VMs or I want hosts or I want folders or data stores or clusters, things like that. In this, all we do is type in essentially this into any browser, any API tool. You can run it with curl, and you change the name of the vCenter server that you're trying to get details for. And here is the entirety of the inventory that we know about vCenter right here. Quick, easy to copy, paste, done, right? So people that are looking to do this stuff, it's really great to be able to do this sort of thing. Any other big things that are here to mention really come down to people that are trying to stamp out components for an environment, right? It's the capabilities that we have for actually adding a managed server, adding repository, adding proxies, right? You can still get all the details about jobs. We can actually go through and create a job. We're going to do that in my demo lab. One of the biggest things that we have here that a lot of people are going to be happy about is credentials, right? Access to credentials through the API. Trying to modify credentials or keep credentials updated, especially with PAM systems, as people are talking about doing this with like Flycotic Secret Squirrel or CyberArk or HashiCorp Vault and all of the other tools that are actually handling privileged access management. We have the capabilities of getting to our credentials through the API, and it makes it a little bit easier here through the API. Specifically for the fact that unlike PowerShell, where I have to type in a specific username or even username and description that I'm trying to do just text matching to find a particular instance of a credential, we actually have easy access to the IDs of the credentials. And especially if we help customers to do some work to actually tie instances of credentials inside of Veeam to whatever they have in their privileged account management systems, they know that this ID number is where a specific credential in their PAM is being used. So it becomes a lot easier to update this even with a username and swap to different service accounts or update things just simply like passwords, right? It's a lot easier to deal with at the API level than it is knowing a lot of workarounds for PowerShell pipeline management. Encryption passwords, a great thing that a lot of people have been asking for that we've had, very limited, if not no coverage a lot of times for getting access to this within PowerShell without tons and tons of workarounds. So it's here. We don't have any in the lab, apparently, but you can get to all of this, right? We can see our backups. We can see the objects. We can see the restore points. This is all of the section around the automation, right? Where we can get exports of jobs, credentials, proxies, servers, repos, encryption passwords. These can all just be exported as JSON, right? If I want to export all of our jobs, I can just do try it out. We'll see what this thing looks like here. And, oh, I didn't give it job IDs. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not going to go back and dig one up for this one just to show the export. Essentially, it should give us a list that we'll have in the sample here, right? It'll give us the name of the job, the descriptions, all of the configuration of the job at the API level, which means the list of all of our virtual machines that are included or excluded. It's going to give us our scheduling. It's going to give us, every detail about the actual job config itself, right? All of this level of detail can be exported and easily imported back in. So it's not a bundle of CSV files. It's not people running some kind of hacky PowerShell scripts to be able to export and import these things and having it not match from one version to the next, right? All this stuff is covered. It's in the documentation. Now, let's go ahead and flip over to my lab. And for a quick glance, we're going to flip to the v11 REST API just to get it kind of out of the way, right? As I told you before, there's not a whole lot here. We have the ability to check the status of a collection or a task, right? And look at the schedule for data collections. That's it, right? That's all we've got for data collection. Essentially, is we can start and stop, and we can see, what happened for the last run of this thing, or what is the current schedule for it. Job sessions, we can get some basic details, but there's not a ton that's going to show up inside of here. If we pull back details for a specific session, my authorization timed out on this one. All right. Again, not going to dig into this one too much because v1 is really a v1 version of the API itself. And then licensing info. This can be useful for people that are trying to get current usage details or get a usage report. But a lot of the things that people are looking for true reporting out of v1 or automation of the reports themselves or export of the data contained within those reports is not there, right? Hopefully that's coming in the future. Don't really have a time frame for a lot of this stuff, but v1 does have an API. It is here. It does a handful of things. We're good. So for the VBR REST API, what I kind of want to walk everybody through here just to see the basics of this, right? This is us playing with Swagger. Again, everything we're actually doing on this instance, everything we do in this try it out function that's in here runs live code against our servers. So do this in your lab or a lab that you can make mistakes, destroy things, rebuild if you need to. Do not run this inside of the internal Veeam labs unless you are running only Gits. Hopefully Jason is happy with enough caveats on that one. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and log into my lab. I'm going to authorize myself here. And in case anybody noticed, here I'm actually using my UPNs for my user account, just because that's what I'm typically used to doing for anything that I'm doing for logins. I'm really not used to doing domain format. That's just me and my preference. So this is what I default to. You can type these usernames in domain format or UPN format. Doesn't really make any difference for the API. As long as your credentials are good, it will give you back a token that you need. So now we can take our access token. We will go log in here, authorize, and type in our credentials. Okay, we are now authorized to the server. We will go run our get general options again, just to make sure that we actually get back a good status code. So now that we're really trying to run some interaction with the API server here and want to see what's going on, let's talk about these responses, right? Ideally, we want to get like a 200 or a 201. That's what we're expecting to get back, which is a good status, right? 200 here shows us okay. 401 is unauthorized, and this is essentially what it'll give us back, right? It's going to give us an access denied in a specific string. 403, 404, 500, these are all bad, right? 400s are essentially an access denied or something didn't work right when you tried to do it. 500 means the server's broke. This is all still traditional HTTP protocol, right? These are all the same standard web response codes you would expect to get from a server when you're just browsing around. But we've run this, we've gotten a response of 200. I'm getting back my general options. That means my username and password was correct. It gave me back a token. The token was entered correctly. I'm using that to authenticate back and forth to the server as I'm making these API calls. The things I want to do here, we're going to go and take a look at my VBR instance, right? Simple instance. I created 2 jobs just to have this essentially very plain and simple to look at and see there's not much here. We're going to work with this simple VM 7 points job. We're going to actually clone this. We're going to clone it twice. Once as just a direct copy just to show that we can do it. And once where we're going to actually modify this and take it from being 7 restore points to say 10 days, right? So currently this job exists. It's got a retention of 7 restore points. We'll see that in the API, but I just want everybody to get kind of comfortable with what we're doing here. So we're going to do some gets to get some information. We're essentially just going to copy and paste that detail back and modify a few details, right? That's really all we're doing here. Let me go ahead and get my API documentation up and ready for when we get to this window. So let's get to jobs. The flow we're going to have for this essentially is I want to get all of my jobs. I want to get a specific ID for the existing job. And then what I want to do is just get that specific job by the ID. So I don't have a lot of additional data. I don't have a lot of other things that are wrapped around it, so that I can copy and paste the specific instance of that job, tweak a couple of different things, basically just really, change the text, change the name and the description, and paste it back in and say, create me a job. That's all we're doing, right? So I'm going to execute this. I want to get my appropriate job, which is going to be this one here at the bottom. So backup, the name that we're working with here is the simple VM 7 points. So I want to copy just the ID of this backup job. Okay. And now we can minimize get all jobs. We want to get job with a specific ID. Again, we hit try it out, we paste in the ID, we hit execute. Now what I get back is this response body that is just all of the JSON that is the configuration of this job by itself, right? Just to point it out, at least at the beginning, right? What I get back when I'm looking at all of my jobs is I get this big data object, and then all of the details are in here in essentially an array. So for every individual job that I have, they're going to be stacked together. That's why we want to get one single ID in one instance, because this gives us all of the detail that we need to actually be able to just copy and paste back in here to create a job. So I'm going to delete everything that's in this body. I'm running create job. When you hit try it out, it needs the actual request body. This means this is going to be the full instance as it's supposed to look for what this is. I'm deleting my ID because we do not need ID. I'm going to retitle this to just copy simple VM 7 restore points, change the description to the same. Now, the one thing I'm going to have to do here, just because of the way that that detail came back for the virtual machine as the inventory object that's inside of this, I need to get rid of this line that says inventory object. And then I need to get rid of this ending bracket and the size, so that what I have is one single instance of a virtual machine. This is made very clear in the documentation, which I will show you guys in just a second, but I'm just telling you, like, I know these are the steps that I have to do. Is I have to remove my ID and I have to remove a couple of extra little wrappers of components.
Hey, Joe, if I may real quick, because this is really good stuff. Do you mind zooming in just a hair? Love to be able to see that text a little bit more. And while I have your ear, if you don't mind, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions that have come up? Using the API, can we actually change and update passwords? And does it change all the various passwords or only certain ones?
It changes the passwords. What we're doing here is we're changing the instance of the credential, which is what actually gets referenced everywhere, right? Okay. So we're changing the credential in the database, which will automatically change it if it's used for guest processing, guest indexing, things like that, right? If that's even a credential that we're leveraging for connecting to a vCenter server or for managed Windows and Linux boxes, we're changing the true instance of that object in the database. Everything else just refers to it by that ID number. So as we change it in the database, everything the next time it tries to get used should get leveraged in there and will get updated.
Nice. Nice. Thanks for that. Also, Christopher had a follow-up question to that limitation on VMware. You mentioned it is coming soon. Does that mean it's going to be updated outside of Veeam's release, or is it a subsequent release of version 11?
No, the APIs, at least currently, all of the coverage for the API is part of the product. So it's as VBR releases or updates come out, there may be updates for APIs similar to how it was with PowerShell, right? It's only going to be as we have releases of VBR because it is tied to the product.
Perfect. Thanks, and appreciate it.
Yep. So just so everybody sees, right, we did get back a response code of 200, which shows us this response body that essentially here's all the objects that it was doing for this job. As we can see here, we have now cloned a VMware backup job, right? Simple job, single VM that's inside of it. It still has just our link for 7 restore points. So now what we're going to do is using this same exact thing. Actually, I should not have closed that. what we're going to do here is we're going to take this same exact code where we want to stamp out a copy 2, right? We'll say copy 2 of simple VM. We're going to change this to 12 days. Okay, 12 days. And inside of this object, we actually have details for retention, which will show us what is currently set, and it gives us the capabilities of what it is we want to set for the retention on the new job. There we go. Sorry, guys. Retention policy. So we're going to change this from restore points to days, because those are the two options that we have. And we're going to change this to, oh, what did I say? 10, 12. I think I did 10. Let's see. Nope, 12 days. Of course not. We're going to set that to 12 days. Okay, so we're going to execute the same code again. We have the exact same job object that we started with. We have the exact same code that's in here. We have now changed the retention policy by changing the type from literally restore points to days and changing that quantity. We get back a response code of 200. If we go back and look inside of VBR, we now have copy 2, which we have retitled. It's got an appropriate description set on it. If we go in and edit to take a look at this, our retention policy is 12 days, right? We can actually use this to just clone existing jobs and modify these things. You also have the capabilities to just edit existing jobs and make these modifications. This stuff is here, guys, right? It's simple job management. This may look like very, very gnarly code, right? Especially as we look at some of the scheduled stuff where you have to try and construct this huge string of which hour in the day is this thing on or off, right? But just realize most people that are doing this with an API are probably going to stamp out a standard block of code to do this in maybe 5 different ways, right? Or they'll tweak it as they need it and keep it in source control, and they will just pull it out as they need to rerun another iteration of whatever this thing is. But with copy and paste, nobody learning any PowerShell, nobody getting elevated permissions or any stuff like that, right? In a web browser, we have cloned VBR jobs. And y'all saw how quickly this comes up, right? This is, you know, a VM that's got very, very limited resources in my lab. This stuff is awesome for the people that have been asking for it. One of the other things I want to show y'all, just to walk through like a couple of different steps for this, right? For backup infrastructure. As you can see, I have the default proxy that came in on this RC server. I have one standalone proxy with virtual proxy number 1. We're going to do essentially the same steps for creating an infrastructure object. I'm going to get all of my managed servers and get a single instance, and then I'm going to go create another one by just changing the name of what it is I want to have it connect to for the other server. Then we're going to add a proxy, then we're going to add a repository. I'm going to stamp out one that matches exactly what this is, right? It's just going to be a Windows server, right? Standard Windows proxy that I've got here, proxy role on top of it, repository for, you know, a name of NTFS per VM that lives on D drive backups. The proxy number 2 that I have is the same configuration of a Windows box, so we can get away with doing simple, you know, copy and paste on this. So again, manage servers. I'm going to do try it out. I'm going to go to Windows host just to filter down the list of what comes back here. Really, in this instance, all it's doing is not showing me my vSphere server. I want to get the ID of my proxy that I'm working with, right? This is my VBR11 RC proxy. I'll zoom in a little bit more so everybody can see it. I want the ID number of this specific instance of this proxy. I want to now close get all servers, and I want to get server by ID. I put in the ID of my managed server, and all I want to do is get far enough down that I can hit copy, right? That's all I'm doing here. Copy this detail, come to add server, hit try it out, paste in all of my details for what I want here. Again, get rid of my ID because I do not need that. That gets assigned when this proxy gets added. I'm going to change this to proxy 02. Change my description to VBR proxy number 2 by API. We're going to execute. What I should get back at this instance is a 201, I think, actually, where it shows me that it's in progress. Nope. Okay, so 200 actually. So it's giving me infrastructure item saving. If I get over here quick enough, what I can actually get into is look at the history. And if I look at the system data, we'll see that we're going to get a new host discovery that shows up inside of here. It may be easier to just watch for the proxy, for the managed server itself by the time it comes in. Yep, here we go. So we've now added another managed server, right? This is a Windows server that now exists in VBR. Again, this is a bit of a cheat. It's a Windows box that was already standalone. It was already existing, had all the same credentials because it lives in the same Active Directory OU, so the same service count works for it. So I didn't have to do things like specify a different credential for it, right? But if I'm stamping out 8 proxies and they're all pre-configured the same exact way, or they come from the same template and they're in the same AD groups or OUs, you can do things like this, right? We can cheat and just say, okay, change the name of all of these and stamp me out 8, right? Just run it through a loop. Now that I have this managed server, what I'm going to do is go back in again to get all servers, just because I want the ID of this new server that gets stamped out. Proxy 02. So I want this ID of this Windows host because this is the ID that I now need to reference for Notepad is fighting with me right now. There we go. I want this host ID because this is what's actually going to get referenced when we're trying to add a proxy in a repository role. So we're going to go through the same steps here, right? I'm going to go get an existing proxy for the number 1 that's in here, essentially, copy and paste that into add proxy, and just change the name and change the description. So if there's any questions, you guys can go ahead and fire away now. I'm just going to go ahead and go through this process so we can see like kind of every step along the way as it adds these layers.
No, we're good right now. No questions yet. Thank you.
All right, virtual proxy number 1. I need to grab the ID of the proxy itself. Okay, that was get all. Now we get by ID. Paste in the ID of the proxy. Copy. Go to add a proxy, try it out, overwrite all of this. Again, delete my ID number, change it to proxy 02, change my virtual proxy to ID number 2 by API. Microphone's causing me problems. Right. Host ID. So since I'm cloning and I'm matching everything to what was there existing, all I need to do is change this host ID and paste in what was the managed server that I just created, right? Again, we run this, we're going to get back a response of, okay. So just so everybody sees, this one that I got back here was this 401 error, and it tells me that the authentication is bearer. This means Joe was too slow and I've got to go log back in, right? The advantage of doing this kind of stuff in Swagger, especially while you're playing around and getting these things working, is all I've got to do is go back to cancel, hit try it out again. I hit execute. I'm going to get my new access token, and I go back and do the authenticate steps, right? So authorize, log out, type in bearer. And if everybody is not totally following along with this, I completely understand it. This was meant to be more of a, you guys can just see this stuff happen on the fly. There will be documentation of how to do this. We've got documentation around how to get these things into Postman if you want to play with it with a real tool instead of just the Swagger UIs. We're going to create lots of content for y'all to understand how to do this, and particularly to be able to run through things in the demo labs, whether it's the internal lab or your own lab, so that you can get comfortable with showing this to customers if they want to see it, right? I want you guys to at least be able to pull up information on the fly. Now, all I've done essentially was go back up to the top, log in, put my new bearer token in, and it says, okay, good, you're now authenticated. I hit execute with the same exact code that was still saved there in the UI, and we are now creating a proxy. So I've got my managed server. I now have my proxy. If I go look at my backup repositories, again, I've got my default, I've got my NTFS per VM. Same exact steps on this thing, guys, right? It's matching the config of what's there. So all I need to do is go get all the instances, go get a particular ID, copy, paste, change some text, stamp out lots of things, right? Profit. So what I want is the correct instance of what I'm working with here, right? This is my proxy 1, which is D drive backups. So I want the ID of this proxy. Come on. Then get the specific instance of this proxy, try it out, paste in my ID, scroll down, copy. That's all we need. Go add a repository, hit try it out, paste in all of our code. For this one, I'm going to get rid of my ID, and I'm actually going to get rid of the tag because I want this to get reassigned when it does. I'm going to change my description to proxy02. Add the description at the front of this one. Okay, so it's a Windows local. I'm naming it NTFS per VM-API. My mount server ID and my host ID need to be updated from this particular Windows host to the one that we created. So we will overwrite this. We will overwrite this. Hit execute. As long as Joe typed everything in correctly, we should get back a 200 response and see that infrastructure item is saving. This will take a few seconds here to update and refresh. But this is it, guys, right? I mean, this was us creating a clone of a job and creating a clone of a job and changing it from restore points to number of days to keep for retention. This was us creating, still, I give you the caveats of it's cheating, right? But taking a new Windows host and putting it in as a managed server, adding a proxy role on top of it, adding a backup repo on top of it, and it's here. This is faster than I can do it in PowerShell most of the time, right? For how quickly these interactions actually go, because it's just faster processing it at the API level rather than PowerShell on my remote box, talking to PowerShell on the VBR server, talking to the database, and then doing all of its things. This is awesome, right? This is really like the biggest part of the demo that I want everybody to understand, right? It's getting into Swagger, it's being able to get information, it's understanding that a lot of this you can do simply with copy and paste. If you at least have your environments planned out, if you know what these details of all these things are, you can put it in there and you can make things work pretty easily, or you can at least try it out in your lab and see what works and see what doesn't. The other thing I want everybody to be aware of is we have API documentation for everything. So say for the jobs, right? Get all jobs will tell us these are the things that we have for get jobs. These are the query parameters that we have for getting all of our jobs. It shows us that we can do, whoops, oh, where did that? Get jobs, here we go, okay. We can tell it we want to skip a particular number of jobs, right? We want to limit the number of jobs we get back when we run this query. We want to order it by like name or type or description or whatever other parameter we have on these jobs. You can tell it you want it to be ascending versus descending. You can put in a filter of the wildcard for jobs you want to get back when you're querying for these things. You can put in the types of jobs you want to have returned, right? So you can get back details from the API only for what it is you're specifically trying to do here. This is super, super cool stuff, and the documentation makes it really easy to understand these things. Even if you wanted to go create a job and had no idea what we were doing and didn't know about the trick for just copying and pasting stuff inside of the Swagger UI, you can come into the documentation here, and with this request sample that we have, you can expand out all of these fields here, or just copy all of it, right? Expand it all, copy everything. And you can find out if you want to create a job, you essentially have to give it some very simple details of like, what's the backup repository you want to put it on. You can leave it with the default stuff that comes in here for guest processing or for scheduling, right? You know, the biggest thing that we have to do here is kind of the same thing that we do for a shell job that we call in PowerShell, is give it a name and give it a vSphere object to be put inside of here, which means for this instance, you're giving it the host name of the actual vCenter server itself. You're giving it the name of a particular VM that you're trying to put in here. The type is going to be virtual machine. And then the object ID is going to be your VM number, which really is going to be the same number you can identify if you're looking at a VM from the vCenter HTML5 UI, right? In the name or in the URL, you're going to see like VM-4852 or something like that. That's going to be the actual object ID that goes back inside of here. If you copy and paste all the rest of this and put in the ID of your backup repository that you're trying to do, you can copy and paste this and create jobs all day long and just put in, you know, individual VM names or add more instances of this block of code to put in however many VMs you want into a job, and it's done, right? Super simple stuff to do once you just kind of get in here, play around with it and get the basics and understand how these things work and look, right? Even for the virtual machines, right? We have this virtual machine spec, which exists not only in the documentation that we have here, which is on Help Center, right? Everybody can see it here. This is the test version because it's not completely live yet, but we're going to have a reference guide for just the VBR API itself. Or if you're playing around with this thing on your VBR server and you want to know what these things are, you can come in here at the very bottom and just look at the jobs schema, right? It's the same exact information, just in a slightly different format for what it is that you would have to do if you wanted to go create a backup job. It's going to show you the same details about what you have to put in here for VMs and all of the information that has to go inside of this thing, right? So this is all here. This is you doing it from a web browser. This is me on my VBR server locally with a local Chrome instance installed, just going to port 9419/Swagger, right? And that's it, right? This is me having a VBR server in Chrome, and I'm creating jobs and I'm creating, you know, infrastructure components. So I will pause to see if there are any questions. I will flip over to another box because the last thing I want to show you guys just real quickly is some really cool stuff with Postman.
Yeah, Charles Clark actually asked, he goes, do you know if we're retiring or deprecating out any API calls in Enterprise Manager that may overlap with VBR calls, like clone jobs?
As far as I understand, if we have any overlapping, they're not going to be deprecated at least for one full version or two, which means probably full Veeam version, which may be one or more versions of the API itself, just because of the fact that there are people that rely on those currently. So we're going to try and get to feature parity and, at least as I understand it, be better at telling people ahead of time we're going to be making breaking changes to the APIs to remove that functionality. If anything, it may just get locked in at whatever functionality it's at, and it will stay there, and it will just not get any advancements while we do the same thing inside of VBR API.
Nice, thanks. Good question. Great answer. Thank you.
Don't get Charles a big head, man, making him think he's getting good questions in here. Yeah. That's going to cause me problems.
That's all the questions we have for now. Keep that train. Okay. Thank you.
You know what? We're going to have some fun with this. We're going to go ahead and start from scratch with Postman, okay? If anybody has ever used this thing before, hopefully you'll see this and it's not too much of a refresher. If anyone has not used Postman before, I'm going to act as if I have opened Postman for the first time. I'm going to create myself a workspace, which just means I'm going to have like a container for all of my stuff inside of here. I'm going to create an environment for an active environment. I'm going to title this Veeam Live. And just because I know that I've got some stuff inside of here, I'm going to create variables for base URL, VBR user, and VBR password. So I'm creating myself some variables. I'm saving this as a new environment of Veeam Live, okay? What I want to do is I want to create a new collection. Really, this means this is going to be essentially like a folder of stuff that exists here that will give me a hierarchy for all of this stuff. So to do this effectively for VBR, really what I want to do here is I want to go get the JSON file for this Swagger UI. So let me get this open in a new window just so you guys can see. What I'm going to do here is this link at the very top of the window for this swagger.json file. I'm just going to do save link as. I'm going to save this Swagger JSON file. I'm going to come into Postman, hit import, hit files, Swagger JSON. From that file, it already knows this is an Open API 3.0 format file. The name that came in from that file is Veeam Backup and Replication REST API. Make sure this box is checked for generate collection from imported APIs. You can link them as however you want. I almost always do documentation. I do import. All I've done is downloaded a file, import this into Postman, press the button and wait. Once this API is imported, you will see we now have a collection for the Veeam Backup and Replication REST API. Come on. Postman is hanging on me here. There we go. There's my collection. Okay. This is going to be laid out similarly to what we had inside of Swagger, right? This folder for OAuth is our get access token that we're going to start with. So what I want to do is pull up this call for get access token. This base URL is going to be pre-populated from the environment variable that I have. So we have our base URL here. What I want to do is go ahead and edit these. I'm going to put in the value of my VBR server and just the port for 9419. I'm going to put in my same username and password that I did for doing all this in Swagger, and we're going to get this thing up and going. Let's see, maybe what did I do for this one? Okay, save. Now, one other cheat that we've got for this, we have this stuff documented on Veeam Hub. So if we come to Veeam Hub, if we go to Postman for backup and replication, there's this little snippet of code for this automated test JavaScript, right? Copy, paste, that's pretty much it. So I'm going to save my variables. I'm going to go back to my get access token, add this test inside of here. Really, all this means is that if I get a status code of 200 and if it passes my authentication, it's going to put it back into this VBR access token variable. Don't worry, guys. Again, all of this stuff is documented on GitHub. So if anybody's trying to do this in the future, you know, we have simple exports for it. I'm going to edit my collection up here just to tell it for authorization. We need to switch this to bearer token. Our token is going to be this same variable name for VBR access token, which will get pre-populated when we log in. Okay. Save this, close it. I'm going to modify up here. We can remove refresh token, we can remove code, we can remove grant type. So our grant type is password. We're just going to change these to our variables that we have. VBR user, VBR password. And at this point, I should be able to save, I should be able to send, and okay. Base URL, what is it not liking here? You know what? Let me double check that I have my SSL certification turned off. Oh, why am I not getting base URL? What's having a problem with? Okay, well, now switch on the demo, guys. Hold on. Let's do this from the desktop instead. Okay. Oh, come on, screen share. All right, y'all, hold on 1 second. Okay, we'll flip back to another Postman instance. Okay, and we're back up with this one. So what we're working with here again is this get access token. I think I fat fingered something in here, but essentially what we need for this body is just that we're using a grant type of password. We've got our variables for username and password that are set for our environment. We have that snippet of code that we put in here that says, if we get a valid request, save that access token for us to just rerun over and over. That gets set here at the API level. The real bit that I want to show everybody for this stuff that gets really cool, especially for your customers or for anybody that's trying to do monitoring and things like that, right? Get all jobs. I want to run this. I want to turn off all of my filters, and I want to have details for every job that exists inside of VBR. Very cool. I get all my data back. This is fun, but like I don't want to do this. I don't want to come into Postman to keep doing this stuff every time. Postman has great functionality for code where I can say, I want the code for this call. You're going to swap out, obviously, the bearer token because that's going to be part of the authentication. That's what anybody's going to do as they're running a workflow dealing with an API anyway. If I want to run this in curl, I can copy and paste this and run it in curl. If I want to run this in Python, whether you want to do it through v3 or you want to do it through version 2, here's the code to copy and paste to run this exact thing. If you want to run it in PowerShell and use invoke REST method, here you go. It's copy paste, right? We can click around, we can modify things, we can make all of these API calls work for exactly what it is we're trying to do, save them in Postman, and then say, I want a code snippet to do this so I don't even have to remember next time how to make all this stuff happen. I copy and paste this into command line and it just runs, right? That's it. So that's all I've got to show everybody. Again, we will do, much more in-depth documentation and walkthroughs on how to actually do this stuff. Hopefully you guys at least got slightly comfortable with the fact that, you can just kind of do this stuff on the fly, right? It's not the end of the world. Nobody's going to come crashing down when they run an API call and they get back the bad, invalid response that it didn't work. You just fix it and do it again, right?